blistering Texas sun beat down with an unforgiving intensity, baking the asphalt until it shimmered like liquid in the distance. Dust motes danced in the superheated air, creating an almost surreal haze over the endless, sparsely populated landscape. Here, far from the manicured lawns and towering skyscrapers of the city, the only visible life seemed to consist of resilient mesquite trees and the occasional buzzard circling lazily overhead, a grim sentinel against the vast, indifferent sky. It was a place where luxury cars, especially a sleek, imported sports sedan, stood out like a misplaced jewel, a stark, almost absurd anomaly against the rugged backdrop. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant hum of insects and the subtle, worrying hiss emanating from beneath the hood of that very car. This was not merely isolation. It was an active disengagement from the familiar, a place where urban comforts evaporated, replaced by a raw, unyielding reality. Within this bubble of escalating discomfort sat Madison Blake, a name synonymous with privilege, high fashion, and the kind of generational wealth that allowed for spontaneous trips to Paris and private jets to remote island getaways. Madison, a young millionaire heiress in her early 20s, knew the intricate dance of exclusive clubs and the whispered gossip of high society. Her days were typically a whirlwind of charity galas, fashion shows, and managing her substantial portfolio of investments, all from the climate-controlled comfort of a penthouse overlooking a bustling metropolis. Her life was largely curated, every inconvenience smoothed over by an army of personal assistants and the limitless reach of her family's influence. But today, the meticulously constructed edifice of her privileged existence had crumbled under the relentless pressure of a truly unexpected adversary, the great, untamed Texas wilderness. She was supposed to be on her way to a secluded resort for a last-minute spa retreat, a whim decided just hours earlier. Her car, a gleaming testament to German engineering, had been her trusted chariot, a seamless extension of her modern, connected world. Now, that world felt impossibly distant. The sleek dashboard, usually a hub of digital information and seamless connectivity, glowed with a malevolent red warning light. Her GPS, which had confidently guided her for hours down increasingly narrower and less maintained roads, had abruptly declared "signal lost," and then simply died, leaving her with a blank screen. Frantically, she had fumbled for her phone, its polished surface reflecting her growing panic, only to find the dreaded "no service" icon mocking her from the top corner. A cold dread, foreign and unsettling, began to creep into her carefully constructed composure. Then came the unmistakable, guttural gurgle from the engine, followed by a thick plume of steam billowing from under the hood, carrying with it the acrid smell of hot metal and engine coolant. Her car, her sanctuary, her only link to civilization, was officially overheating, stranded, alone, in the middle of nowhere. The vast, empty landscape suddenly felt less picturesque and more menacing, stretching in every direction with an unsettling, silent judgment that mirrored her own mounting fear. This was not just an inconvenience. It was an existential crisis for a woman whose greatest challenge until now had been choosing between two equally fabulous designer handbags. If you're finding this story as gripping as we do, please hit that subscribe button and join our channel for more tales of unexpected twists and turns. Every subscription helps us bring you more compelling narratives. The scorching sun continued its relentless assault, turning the air into a shimmering mirage. Madison, her silk blouse clinging uncomfortably, felt a desperate sense of isolation as she fiddled with the temperamental car engine. Each failed attempt to coax life back into the luxury vehicle only amplified the vast emptiness surrounding her. The endless expanse of sun-baked scrubland stretched to the horizon, a cruel mockery of the meticulously manicured city parks she was accustomed to. Her phone remained stubbornly devoid of signal bars, a useless slab of technology in this primitive, unforgiving landscape. A knot of pure, unadulterated fear began to tighten in her stomach. This wasn't just an inconvenience. This was a terrifying vulnerability she had never encountered, a raw exposure she was ill-equipped to handle. The silence, broken only by the buzzing of unseen insects and the distant caw of a bird of prey, pressed in on her, making her feel utterly insignificant. Every shadow seemed to hold a hidden threat. Every gust of wind rustling through the dry bushes sounded like approaching footsteps. She glanced nervously down the deserted road, half hoping for rescue, half dreading what might appear. Then a distant rumble, a low growl that slowly intensified, broke the oppressive quiet. A plume of dust rose against the hazy blue sky, growing larger with unnerving speed. Madison squinted, her heart hammering against her ribs. It was a vehicle, an old, beat-up pickup truck, its faded paint job a stark contrast to her sleek, polished car. The sight brought a momentary flicker of relief, quickly extinguished by a deeper, primal unease. There was something about the way the truck approached, not slowing, not hesitant, but purposeful, almost predatory, that sent a shiver down her spine. As it drew closer, she could make out two figures inside, their silhouettes dark against the glare. They weren't slowing down to help. Not exactly. Instead, the truck veered, pulling off the main road and rumbling to a stop a few yards behind her car, effectively blocking any potential retreat down the sparse track. Two men emerged, their movements unhurried, almost lazy, yet radiating a certain confidence that Madison found deeply unsettling. They were burly, clad in worn denim and dusty cowboy hats, faces tanned and etched with lines that spoke of long hours under the sun. Their eyes, though partially obscured by their hat brims, seemed to fix on her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. The air crackled with unspoken tension. One of them, taller and broader, leaned against the side of his truck, a casual posture that belied the immediate sense of threat. His companion, shorter and with a perpetual sneer on his lips, slowly ambled towards her, kicking at loose gravel. "Well now, looky here," the shorter man drawled, his voice thick with a guttural Texas accent. "Looks like someone's found themselves in a heap of trouble." His words were ostensibly concerned, but his tone was laced with an undeniable mockery, a thinly veiled condescension that made Madison bristle. The taller man remained silent, his gaze raking over her expensive car, then her designer clothes, lingering for a moment on her face. Madison instinctively clutched her small handbag tighter, forcing herself to meet their stares, though her knees felt like jelly. "Fancy ride for these parts," the first man continued, a slow, humorless smile spreading across his face. "Lost your way, little city girl?" His question wasn't an offer of help. It was a statement, a declaration of her vulnerability, delivered with a smug satisfaction that tightened the fear in her chest into a cold, hard knot. She felt utterly cornered, observed, and terribly, terribly alone. The men, a sneer twisting their lips, began to circle Madison, their movements predatory, purposeful. Their eyes raked over her expensive designer dress, tracing the lines of her obviously high-end handbag, and finally settling on the sleek, dusty chrome of her luxury vehicle. "Well, well, look what the cat dragged in," one drawled, his voice thick with a mocking amusement that sent a shiver down Madison's spine. "Don't see too many of these fancy land yachts out here, do we, Earl?" Earl, the larger of the two, grunted in agreement, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Nope. Usually folks got more sense than to get their shiny toys dirty on our roads." They took turns, their words like carefully aimed darts, each one intended to chip away at her composure. "Must be tough for a city girl like you, huh? No lattes, no valet parking, nowhere to charge your... What do you call those things? Electric doodads?" The second man snickered, nudging his companion. Madison stood her ground, her chin held high, a facade of cool disdain masking the rising tide of panic within her. She had been taught from a young age that showing weakness was an invitation for exploitation. Her father, a titan of industry, had drilled into her the importance of an unshakable poker face, no matter the internal turmoil. But this was different. This wasn't a boardroom. This was a remote road in the middle of nowhere, with two men who clearly relished her discomfort. Their mockery grew more personal. "That little sundress ain't gonna cut it when the sun goes down, princess. No one's coming for you out here." The implication hung heavy in the air, a thinly veiled threat that sliced through her carefully constructed indifference. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She tried to steady her breathing, to recall her father's calm, authoritative tone, but her mind raced. These weren't the kind of men she could charm or reason with. Their eyes held a cold, calculating glint that spoke of malice, not mischief. Every nerve ending screamed at her to run, but where? Her car was still stubbornly unresponsive, a useless metallic sculpture in the relentless heat. The men exchanged a look, and their demeanor shifted. The playful mockery faded, replaced by something far more sinister. They moved closer, their shadows falling over her, enveloping her in a sense of claustrophobia, despite the wide open space. "You know," Earl began, his voice dropping to a low, gravelly timbre that sent another wave of unease through her. "Folks out here, we don't take kindly to city slickers treating our land like their personal playground, especially when they don't got no respect." The other man cracked his knuckles, the sound unnervingly loud in the oppressive silence. "Yeah, we figure you owe us a little compensation for all your trouble." The implication was clear. They intended to extract payment, and not just in money. Madison's breath caught in her throat. The heat intensified, but it wasn't the sun that made her sweat. It was the icy fear that truly began to grip her, tightening its hold with each passing second. She was alone, isolated, and rapidly running out of ways to pretend she wasn't utterly terrified. The blistering Texas sun intensified its assault, baking the already parched earth and turning the air into a shimmering, suffocating blanket. Madison felt sweat trickle down her back, plastering her designer sundress to her skin, a constant irritating reminder of her growing discomfort. The rednecks, however, seemed impervious to the heat, their weathered faces showing no signs of distress, almost as if they thrived in this oppressive environment. They watched her, their eyes hooded, a predatory gleam in their depths as they savored her visible distress. This was more than just a casual encounter. It was a deliberate, drawn-out psychological game designed to break her down piece by agonizing piece. Every drop of sweat, every nervous glance she cast around the desolate landscape fueled their cruel amusement. She remembered the advice from her self-defense classes, the one about creating distance, about looking for an exit. But here, distance served only to emphasize her isolation, and the only exit was blocked by their hulking figures. Her mind raced, desperate for any shred of control, any small act of defiance. Her hand instinctively went to her pocket, searching for her phone. It was a futile gesture, she knew, with no signal for miles, but the physical act of holding it, of pretending to have a connection to the outside world, offered a phantom sense of security. "Looking for this, little lady?" Earl's voice cut through the silence, deep and resonant. Before she could react, his companion, the one who had cracked his knuckles, moved with surprising speed. A large, calloused hand snatched her phone from her grasp in one swift motion. Her heart leaped into her throat, a choked gasp escaping her lips. Now, even the illusion of connection was gone. He held it up, turning it over in his hand with a contemptuous smirk, as if examining a child's toy. "Fancy gadget, isn't it? Probably cost more than my truck." He tossed it carelessly from one hand to the other, the plastic glinting in the harsh sunlight, threatening to drop it. Madison watched, frozen, her gaze locked on the small device. It wasn't just a phone. It was her last thread to safety, her only potential lifeline. The situation, which had been simmering with veiled threats, now boiled over into overt menace. They spread out casually but deliberately, forming a semicircle that effectively cut off her path back to the car. The metallic gleam of her expensive SUV, once a symbol of her privilege, now felt like a cage, tantalizingly out of reach. Now, where were we? The phone snatcher drawled, his tone dripping with mock pleasantry that did nothing to hide the hard edge beneath. Ah, yes, compensation. Earl stepped forward, his shadow falling directly over her face, momentarily shielding her from the sun, but offering no real relief. His eyes, the color of muddy water, held hers hostage. "We got all day, sweetheart. No rush. We figure you got plenty to spare, right? More than enough to make up for inconveniencing us." His voice was low, almost a whisper, yet it resonated with an undeniable power that sent shivers down her spine. The air crackled with unspoken threats, the casual cruelty in their eyes a stark contrast to the vast, indifferent landscape. They had her, truly had her, trapped between the relentless sun and their menacing presence. There was no escape, no easy way out. The terrifying realization settled over her, heavy and cold, that they fully intended to keep her there, to play out their sinister game until they were satisfied. Every muscle in her body tensed, ready for a fight she knew she couldn't win, but utterly unwilling to simply surrender. The fear was no longer a distant whisper. It was a roaring inferno. The suffocating fear gnawed at Madison, but a flicker of her ingrained resilience ignited. She had to try something, anything, to break through their menacing facade. She took a deep, shaky breath, attempting to project an authority she certainly didn't feel. "Look," she began, her voice a little higher than she would have liked. "I understand. I'm in your territory. I'm having car trouble. I'm willing to compensate you for your time, for any inconvenience." She mentally calculated the cash she had in her designer purse. It wasn't much, but surely it would be enough to make them back off. "I have cash, or I can transfer money to you. Just name your price. I just need to get my car fixed and leave." The men exchanged another glance, But this time, it wasn't one of shared malice. It was amusement. A slow, condescending chuckle rumbled from Earl's chest, growing into a harsh, mocking laugh that grated on Madison's nerves. The other man, who she now mentally dubbed Snake, joined in, his grin widening, revealing a missing front tooth. "Money, huh?" Earl finally managed, wiping a tear from his eye. "Bless your little heart, princess. You think this is about money?" Snake leaned in closer, his stale breath washing over her. "See, folks like us, we don't always need money to get what we want. Sometimes it's about principles." His eyes raked over her, from her expensive sunglasses perched on her head to her pristine white sneakers, a silent inventory of her privilege. "You city folk, you ride around in your fancy machines, wearing clothes that cost more than our monthly rent, looking down your noses at honest, hard-working people. You think you're better than us, don't you?" Madison felt a profound chill that had nothing to do with the searing heat. Their animosity was rooted in something far deeper than a simple roadside encounter. It was a simmering resentment, a class warfare playing out on this desolate stretch of highway. Their actions were less about immediate gain and more about asserting a twisted sense of justice, a crude attempt to level the playing field, if only for a fleeting moment. Her wealth, which had always been her shield and her advantage, was now a glaring target. "I don't think I'm better than anyone," Madison insisted, though her voice wavered slightly. I'm lost. I need help." She tried to appeal to their humanity, to the basic decency she still hoped existed beneath their callous exterior. "Please, I'm scared. I just want to go home." For a brief, almost imperceptible moment, something flickered in Earl's eyes. A shadow of doubt, perhaps, or a twinge of something akin to pity. He shifted his weight, his gaze dropping from her face to the cracked asphalt. Madison latched onto that tiny, fleeting sign of hesitation, a desperate spark of hope. "We can just forget this ever happened," she pressed, trying to sound reasonable, even conciliatory. "No harm done." But Snake was quicker to react. He nudged Earl roughly with his elbow, a sharp, disapproving grunt escaping his lips. "Don't go getting soft on us now, Earl," he growled, his voice laced with renewed venom. "She ain't scared enough yet. She still thinks she can buy her way out of trouble, just like always." He turned his full, menacing attention back to Madison, his eyes narrowed to slits. "You ain't going anywhere, little heiress, not until we've had our fill, and money ain't got nothing to do with it." The glimmer of false hope extinguished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving Madison once again in the chilling embrace of their unified, unyielding hostility. The realization solidified. They wanted to punish her, to make her feel the sting of their resentment. And they weren't finished yet. The situation was no longer about simple humiliation or veiled threats. It had crossed an invisible line into something far more dangerous. The rednecks, their faces etched with a predatory amusement, took another step closer, effectively boxing Madison in. Their eyes, once merely mocking, now held an unsettling glint that promised much worse than just verbal taunts. Madison felt a primal surge of terror, a cold dread seeping into her bones that transcended any discomfort she had ever known. This wasn't just about fear of being stranded or losing her phone. This was about a profound, imminent threat to her safety, to her very being. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, but there was nowhere to go, no escape route visible on the desolate horizon. The vastness of the landscape, which had initially felt oppressive, now felt like a cruel trap, leaving her utterly exposed. She could almost feel the heat radiating off their bodies, a suffocating closeness that made her skin crawl. Earl's hand, calloused and dirty, twitched as if he were about to reach for her, and the other man, his eyes fixed on her with an unnerving intensity, let out a low, guttural chuckle. It was a sound devoid of humor, purely menacing. Madison braced herself, her heart pounding so violently she thought it might burst through her chest. She searched desperately for any sign of a way out, any flicker of humanity in their hardened eyes, but found none. It felt like the world had narrowed to this single, terrifying point, with no past and no future beyond the next breath. Her mind raced through every self-defense lesson, every scenario her overprotective father had insisted she learn, but none seemed adequate for this raw, utterly hostile encounter. Just as the larger man, Earl, began to raise his arm, a movement that sent a fresh wave of panic through Madison. A flicker on the distant horizon caught her eye. It was barely perceptible at first, a shimmering distortion in the brutal heat haze that danced above the long, straight road. Her desperate gaze clung to it, trying to make sense of the mirage-like image. Then, slowly, with agonizing slowness, the distortion began to coalesce, taking on a form. A figure on horseback. The sight was so unexpected, so out of place in her current nightmare, that Madison almost dismissed it as a hallucination, a desperate trick of her mind. But it persisted, growing clearer with each passing moment, a lone rider silhouetted against the blinding Texas sky. The horse's gait was steady, unhurried, as if it had all the time in the world, yet it moved with an undeniable purpose. As the figure drew closer, the distinct outline of a wide-brimmed hat became visible, then the broad shoulders of the rider. The rednecks, engrossed in their cruel game, hadn't noticed at first. Their attention was solely fixed on Madison, enjoying her palpable fear. But then, as the thudding of hooves against the dry earth grew faintly audible, a subtle shift occurred in their predatory focus. The second man, the one who had snatched her phone, was the first to glance over his shoulder, a frown creasing his brow. Earl, sensing the distraction, turned as well, his cruel smile faltering. The unexpected sight caused them to pause, their menacing posture freezing mid-action. The imminent threat to Madison momentarily receded as their attention and their focus shifted entirely to the approaching horse and rider. The momentum of their intimidation was broken, however briefly, by this unforeseen arrival. A tiny, fragile seed of hope, hesitant and almost unbelievable, began to sprout in Madison's despairing heart. The sheer audacity of a single rider appearing in such a desolate place at such a critical moment felt almost surreal. The sun continued to beat down, but now there was a new, powerful shadow stretching across the land. The shimmering distortion solidified, resolving itself into the unmistakable figure of a man. His name was Cole Hart, and he was quite simply a cowboy, a living embodiment of the rugged Texan landscape he traversed. He sat tall in his saddle, his posture relaxed yet alert, astride a sturdy, dependable quarter horse named Dusty. Every movement of the horse, every subtle shift of Cole in the saddle, spoke of countless hours spent under the relentless sun, a silent language of partnership and experience. He rode with an unhurried confidence that seemed to defy the urgency of the moment, yet it commanded an undeniable attention, pulling focus away from the tense standoff with the rednecks. Cole approached slowly, his eyes shaded by the brim of his weathered cowboy hat, meticulously sweeping over the scene. He took in Madison's disheveled appearance, the expensive car with its hood up, and the two men standing too close to her, their body language coiled and aggressive. Nothing escaped his calm, experienced gaze. He didn't need to hear their words to understand the imbalance of power, the palpable fear radiating from the young woman, and the underlying intimidation that permeated the dusty air. He had seen similar situations before, played out in various forms across the vast, lonely stretches of this very land. His presence itself was a statement, a ripple in the stagnant pool of their cruelty. He didn't rush, merely allowed Dusty to continue his rhythmic, steady pace, covering the remaining distance with deliberate ease, as if he were simply out for an afternoon ride. This calm, however, was not indifference. It was the calculated patience of a man who understood the landscape, both physical and human. As Cole drew nearer, close enough for the glint in his eye to be visible, the rednecks, Earl and his companion, tried to reassert their dominance. Their initial surprise at his appearance quickly morphed into a defiant stance. Earl shifted his weight, his broad shoulders hunching slightly, an unspoken challenge in his posture. "Well, well, look what the cat dragged in," Earl grunted, his voice laced with a bravado that didn't quite cover the flicker of annoyance in his eyes. He puffed out his chest, attempting to project an image of unshakable authority. "Fancy seeing you out here, Hart. Real far from your usual stomping grounds, ain't ya?" His tone was aggressive, a clear signal that he wasn't about to back down, not in front of this city girl. The other man, equally emboldened by Earl's posturing, sneered, his eyes darting between Cole and Madison, trying to gauge how much of a threat this newcomer truly posed. They made it abundantly clear with their aggressive postures and sneering remarks that they weren't afraid of him, not of any lone cowboy, no matter how imposing he appeared on his horse. Cole, however, remained unfazed. He brought Dusty to a gentle halt a few yards from the group, the horse's ears flicking, alert but calm. He didn't dismount, allowing the height advantage to subtly underscore his presence. His gaze remained steady, unwavering as he met Earl's belligerent stare. He simply observed, absorbing their aggression without mirroring it, a quiet strength emanating from him that slowly, surely, began to eat away at their manufactured confidence. The sun beat down, indifferent to the human drama unfolding beneath it, but the air now crackled with a different kind of tension, no longer solely defined by Madison's fear. Cole's presence was a palpable force, an unyielding current that began to subtly erode the redneck's bluster. He didn't raise his voice, didn't make any sudden movements, yet his very stillness seemed to carry more weight than any shouted threat. His gaze, steady and unflinching, swept over the scene, taking in Madison's tear-streaked face, the expensive car, and the two men whose aggressive postures screamed intent. Earl and his companion, accustomed to ruling this patch of highway through intimidation, found themselves unexpectedly on the defensive, their usual bravado faltering under Cole's quiet scrutiny. The cowboy dismounted with a fluid grace that spoke of years spent in the saddle, his boots thudding softly on the baked earth, a sound far more imposing than any snarl. He didn't immediately address the rednecks, instead letting the silence stretch, thick with unspoken challenge. When Cole finally spoke, his voice was a low rumble, seasoned by wind and sun, carrying an authority that transcended mere volume. "Looks like y'all are having a spot of trouble here." His words weren't a question, but a statement of undeniable fact, delivered without judgment, yet laced with an unquestionable expectation of an explanation. It wasn't accusatory, but rather an invitation for them to acknowledge the obvious imbalance they had created. The rednecks shifted uneasily, their eyes darting between Cole and Madison, then back to Cole. They clearly hadn't anticipated an audience, much less one with such an unnerving calm. The bigger man, Earl, attempted to regain some semblance of control. "Just helping the little lady out, Cowboy. Her car's broke down." His voice was rough, but lacked its earlier sneering confidence. A defensive edge had crept in. Cole's gaze remained fixed on Earl, unwavering. "Is that right? Seems to me like she might be needin' a different kind of help." He paused, allowing his words to sink in, his eyes silently conveying a deep understanding of the true situation. He wasn't overtly threatening, but there was an inherent warning in his measured tone, a promise of consequences for continued transgression. His hands rested loosely at his sides, neither clenched in aggression nor open in submission, but simply ready. This unspoken readiness, coupled with his sheer, unruffled demeanor, had a peculiar effect. The rednecks, who thrived on loud threats and overt displays of power, found themselves disarmed by the absence of it, unsure how to respond to a man who refused to be drawn into their game. Madison, though still trembling, felt a cautious hope begin to unfurl within her. This man, this cowboy, was entirely different from anything she had expected. He wasn't another source of aggression, nor was he simply a bystander. He was an active, silent force, and his presence alone was beginning to shift the precarious dynamic. She watched him, studying the firm set of his jaw, the intelligent glint in his eyes, trying to discern his true intentions. Was he truly a rescuer, or merely another variable in her nightmare? His calmness was infectious, a cool balm against the searing panic that had gripped her moments before. She hadn't dared to make a sound, her throat too tight with fear. But now, a small tentative breath escaped her lips. The air, which had felt thick and suffocating, now seemed to clear, just slightly. The rednecks, previously so confident in their control, now appeared agitated, their earlier swagger replaced by an uneasy uncertainty. Cole's quiet authority was working, dismantling their power piece by piece, simply by refusing to acknowledge its legitimacy. Cole's voice, calm yet penetrating, cut through the tense silence, addressing the men directly. "Looks like y'all found yourselves a spot of trouble here, fellas. This ain't exactly a public picnic area." His tone was devoid of accusation, more an observation, but the underlying current of authority was undeniable. He didn't raise his voice, didn't posture, but his eyes, steady and clear, held theirs firmly. He subtly challenged their behavior without resorting to a direct confrontation, employing a sophisticated understanding of local dynamics. He knew these parts, knew the unspoken rules, and he was implicitly reminding them of those rules through his quiet presence. "Well now, Cowboy," the second man, the one who'd taken Madison's phone, sneered, trying to recover some semblance of control. "Just helping this young lady with her broken-down car. She seemed a little lost." His words were laced with false sincerity, a pathetic attempt to mask their earlier aggression. Earl, however, remained mostly silent, his gaze shifting between Cole and Madison, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his hardened features. He rubbed his chin, a subconscious gesture perhaps, indicating a wavering resolve. Cole, sensing the subtle shift in their dynamic, pressed on, not with threats, but with pointed questions that exposed the flimsy nature of their narrative. "Is that so?" Cole responded, his gaze sweeping over Madison's distressed face, then back to the men's shifty eyes. "Funny, she don't look like she needs help from folks who'd be snatching her phone." His words were like gentle probes, each one chipping away at their fabricated story. He then gestured vaguely at the empty stretch of road around them. "And I don't recall seeing your names on any roadside assistance vehicles around here. Last I checked, this stretch belongs to the Bar M Ranch. Y'all got permission to be loitering on private land?" This specific local knowledge resonated deeply. The Bar M was known for its no-nonsense attitude regarding trespassers, a detail these men would certainly be aware of. The question hung in the air, a perfectly aimed dart. It wasn't a direct order to leave, but a reminder of potential consequences far greater than a simple argument with a cowboy. The second man's bravado began to deflate visibly. He glanced at Earl, who merely shrugged, a clear sign that his earlier aggression was now tempered by a more pragmatic assessment of the situation. The implied threat of local law, or more accurately, local custom and property rights, carried more weight than any direct challenge from Cole would have. The quiet confidence in Cole's posture, the way he sat atop Dusty, unmoving yet utterly in command, amplified the impact of his words. He was not just a lone rider. He embodied the spirit of this land, its rugged justice, and its unwritten laws. Dusty, Cole's horse, remained perfectly still throughout the exchange, a magnificent, watchful presence. His powerful frame and calm demeanor added an unspoken layer of authority to Cole. The horse's deep, intelligent eyes seemed to observe everything, mirroring Cole's unflappable composure. Dusty wasn't just a mount. He was a silent partner, an extension of Cole's will. There was no fidgeting, no restless pawing of the ground, just a solid, immovable mass that further projected Cole's control without any overt action. His mere existence contributed to the intimidating aura, a silent testament to the raw power and untamed spirit of the West that Cole represented. The rednecks, for all their bluster and aggressive posturing, were now faced with an undeniable force. A man and his animal, operating with a natural authority that their manufactured bullying simply could not stand against. The younger of the two men shifted his weight, his eyes darting towards their pickup truck, a clear indication that a retreat was becoming increasingly appealing. The fight had drained out of him, leaving only a residue of resentment. Cole, seeing the younger man's gaze drift towards their escape route, chose that precise moment to deliver the final unyielding blow. His voice, still calm, but now edged with an unmistakable firmness, cut through the oppressive heat. "Now, y'all can either ride on out of here in a civil manner, or we can discuss the finer points of trespassing with Sheriff Brody. Your choice, boys." It wasn't a question, but a directive, delivered with the quiet authority of someone who held all the cards. His eyes, devoid of any anger, held a depth of experience that promised swift, unyielding consequences for further defiance. The implication was clear. Sheriff Brody wouldn't be as patient or as polite. This was a man who understood the rhythm of this land, and he knew exactly how to make its unwritten laws work in his favor. The second man, the one who had seemed more eager to back down, nudged Earl with his elbow, a silent plea to cut their losses. Earl, his face a mask of simmering resentment, glared first at Cole, then at Madison, before finally allowing his eyes to fall on the younger man. The bluster had completely drained from him, replaced by a grudging acceptance of their defeat. He knew when he was beaten, even if he didn't like it. He spat on the ground, a final, futile gesture of defiance, before turning heel and stomping towards their dilapidated pickup truck. The younger man, relieved, didn't hesitate, quickly following his companion. They climbed into the truck, slamming the doors shut with unnecessary force, the sound echoing harshly in the otherwise silent landscape. The engine sputtered to life, coughing out a cloud of black smoke before the old vehicle lurched forward, kicking up dust as it sped away, disappearing down the long, straight road as quickly as it had arrived. Their departure was less a retreat and more a hasty, ignominious flight. Madison, who had been holding her breath for what felt like an eternity, slowly exhaled. Her knees, previously locked in tense rigidity, now threatened to give way. A wave of profound relief washed over her, quickly followed by the crushing weight of residual fear and shock. Her body trembled uncontrollably, the adrenaline that had fueled her defiance now leaving her weak and disoriented. It was over, but the terror lingered, an unwelcome residue. She gripped the car door for support, her knuckles white. The heat, which had been a secondary concern moments ago, now felt overwhelming, pressing down on her with suffocating intensity. Her mind, still reeling from the sudden shift in dynamics, struggled to process the reality of her escape. Cole watched the truck recede into the distance, ensuring they were truly gone before turning his attention back to Madison. He dismounted Dusty with an easy, practiced grace, his boots thudding softly on the dry earth. Dusty, ever the stoic companion, simply shifted his weight, his ears twitching, before settling into a patient stillness. Cole walked slowly towards Madison, his spurs jingling softly with each step, a comforting rhythmic sound in the sudden quiet. He didn't rush, giving her a moment to compose herself, to process the aftermath of her harrowing ordeal. As he drew nearer, Madison's eyes, wide with a mixture of fear and dawning gratitude, met his. She was still shaking, her carefully constructed composure having shattered under the prolonged pressure. The glint of tears in her eyes was unmistakable, a testament to the raw emotion she had so fiercely suppressed. Her relief was palpable, a fragile thing that threatened to collapse into full-blown hysterics at any moment. The intensity of the past minutes had stripped away the layers of designer clothing and urban sophistication, revealing a raw, vulnerable young woman. Cole recognized the signs of shock and trauma, having seen it countless times in this unforgiving landscape. He approached her with a quiet kindness, his presence a steady anchor in the swirling chaos of her emotions. Cole, with a subtle but firm directive, made it clear that the situation was over. His eyes held a depth of experience that silenced the remaining defiance. The younger man, whose bravado had already been chipped away, was the first to move, a reluctant shuffle toward the pickup. Earl, however, still harbored a lingering chip on his shoulder. He glared at Cole, his jaw tight, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "This ain't over, Cowboy," he spat, his voice thick with unfulfilled malice. But even his own words lacked their earlier conviction. The threat felt hollow, a desperate attempt to salvage some semblance of authority from a rapidly deteriorating situation. Cole met his gaze unflinchingly, a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head, his only reply. It wasn't a challenge, but a dismissal, a quiet understanding that Earl's bluster held no real weight here. The cowboy's silence was more disarming than any retort could have been, stripping Earl of the audience he craved for his impotent rage. Finally, with a frustrated huff, Earl turned and stomped toward the passenger side of the beat-up truck. The door slammed shut with a reverberating clang that echoed through the quiet landscape. The engine sputtered to life, a cloud of black smoke belching from the exhaust, and with a screech of tires on gravel, the pickup spun around and sped off, disappearing quickly into the hazy distance, leaving behind only dust and the lingering scent of diesel. Madison stood trembling, the adrenaline rush finally subsiding, leaving her weak-kneed and disoriented. The sudden quiet was almost as jarring as the confrontation itself. She watched the truck vanish, a wave of profound relief washing over her, immediately followed by the icy grip of delayed shock. Her legs felt like jelly, and she had to consciously keep herself from collapsing onto the scorching asphalt. Cole dismounted from Dusty then, his movements fluid and unhurried, as if the recent tension had been nothing more than a passing breeze. He tethered Dusty to a sturdy fence post nearby, his long, practiced fingers working easily with the leather reins. Then he turned his attention to Madison, his boots crunching softly on the dry earth as he approached her. He stopped a respectful distance away, his hat still shadowing his eyes, but his voice was gentle, a low, comforting rumble that cut through her lingering fear. "You all right, ma'am?" he asked, his tone laced with genuine concern. His gaze swept over her, not with scrutiny, but with a careful assessment, checking for any signs of physical harm. He knelt beside her car, examining the engine, a practical gesture that calmed her fraying nerves more than any words of comfort could have. "Looks like she just ran a little hot. Probably need to let her cool down before we try anything else. Don't want to seize that engine." Madison could only nod, her voice caught in her throat. Her earlier terror, so potent and immediate, began to recede, replaced by a profound and somewhat disorienting gratitude. "Thank you," she managed to croak out, the words barely a whisper. She was grateful, yes, but a deep-seated wariness, a byproduct of her privileged, sheltered life, still held her back from trusting completely. This was so far outside her normal experience that her brain struggled to process it. She was used to security details, to controlled environments, not sudden, brutal confrontations in the middle of nowhere, followed by quiet, unassuming heroism. He straightened up, his eyes meeting hers, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of empathy in their depths. "No need for thanks, ma'am. Just doing what any decent man would do." He gestured vaguely toward the horizon. "This country, we look out for each other." His simple statement carried an unspoken weight, a philosophy that seemed entirely alien to her urban existence. He then offered her a nearly full canteen of water, its metal cool against her trembling hand. "Drink up. You look like you could use it." Unbeknownst to Madison and Cole at that moment, news of the incident had already begun its swift, insidious journey across the small, tightly knit community. Word travels fast in rural areas, especially when it involves outsiders and a dramatic confrontation. It moved from neighbor to neighbor, phone call to dusty road encounter. The details, embellished and distorted with each retelling, spread like wildfire, igniting conversations at the local diner, the general store, and even the Sunday church service. Sides were already being taken, opinions forming, and established alliances within the community were quietly, subtly beginning to shift. Much like the desert sands under a prevailing wind, the quiet dignity of Cole's actions, juxtaposed with the blatant aggression of the other men, created an undeniable ripple effect that promised to reshape certain local dynamics for days to come. The news of the roadside altercation spread like wildfire through the tight-knit rural community, faster than any digital signal could carry it. It wasn't the kind of sensational gossip that fades quickly. This was a defining moment, an incident that tested the community's unwritten code of conduct. Earl and his companion found themselves pariahs, their usual haunts no longer welcoming, their customary stoicism cracking under the weight of local disapproval. The silent judgments from store clerks, the averted gazes of neighbors, and the pointed remarks from elders cut deeper than any legal reprimand. Their reputation, already tenuous due to past skirmishes with civility, was now irrevocably tarnished. Their attempt to humble the city girl had backfired spectacularly, revealing their own pettiness and cruelty, a stark contrast to the values of mutual respect and aid that, despite their rough edges, most locals genuinely upheld. The community, though often gruff, took fierce pride in its self-reliance and the unspoken understanding that vulnerable individuals, regardless of their background, deserved protection on these lonely stretches of road. Conversely, Cole Hart's standing in the community, already solid, soared to new heights. He wasn't one for grandstanding, his actions always speaking louder than words, but this particular intervention resonated deeply. His calm, decisive response solidified his image as a man of integrity, a quiet protector. People nodded respectfully when he passed, their eyes holding a newfound admiration. His name became synonymous with justice and the steadfast spirit of the Texas plains. He wasn't just a good neighbor. He was the epitome of what it meant to be a Texan, resilient, honorable, and quick to stand up for what was right, especially when someone was being unfairly treated. The incident only reaffirmed what many already knew. Cole Hart was a pillar of the community, the kind of man you could always count on, a steady hand in times of trouble. Meanwhile, Madison, still reeling from the shock, sat beside her disabled car, watching Cole work with a mixture of awe and trepidation. The initial rush of relief had given way to a profound sense of introspection. Her meticulously curated life, defined by urban sophistication and technological reliance, felt incredibly fragile out here in the vast, unforgiving landscape. The sterile pavement of city streets had never prepared her for the raw, untamed beauty and inherent dangers of this place. She had always navigated her world with an almost unconscious assumption of safety, security, and immediate assistance. Here, those assumptions had been violently stripped away, leaving her exposed to the elements and, more disturbingly, to the unpredictable nature of human aggression. Her initial, almost instinctual disdain for the rednecks had been replaced by a more nuanced, if unsettling, understanding of the complex social dynamics at play. She hadn't fully grasped the resentments, the economic hardships, or the cultural clashes that could fester beneath the surface of rural life. Her brief, terrifying encounter had forced her to confront her own privileged existence, the invisible bubble of wealth and status that had always shielded her from such raw vulnerability. She realized with a jolt that her expensive designer clothes, her luxury car, even her cutting-edge smartphone, were not just symbols of her success, but, in this context, glaring markers of her difference, making her a target. She had been so accustomed to judging others through the lens of her urban experiences, never imagining that she, herself, could be so completely out of her depth. The harsh reality of being utterly alone and helpless in an unfamiliar environment was a bitter pill to swallow. As Cole methodically assessed her car, his hands stained with grease but moving with a practiced expertise she couldn't even begin to comprehend, Madison began to reflect on her own assumptions. The stark reality of being out of her element, settling in with a heavy, unavoidable weight. This was a world demanding a different kind of strength, a resilience she hadn't yet cultivated. While they waited for the tow truck, an event that seemed to exist on its own slow-moving timescale out here, Cole, sensing Madison's lingering unease and the quiet storm of her thoughts, began to speak. It wasn't a lecture, nor was it a comfort in the traditional sense, but rather a gentle unfolding of the land around them, its history, and the intricate weave of its people. He spoke of the mesquite trees, their gnarly branches defying the harsh sun, their roots reaching deep for sustenance, a metaphor perhaps for resilience. He spoke of the cattle, not merely as commodities, but as integral parts of a larger ecosystem, their survival mirroring the ranchers' own struggles against drought and unpredictable markets. He talked about the small towns dotting the landscape, each with its own stories, its own feuds, its own fiercely independent spirit. He painted a picture of a life governed not by quarterly reports or stock market fluctuations, but by the rhythms of nature, the rising and setting of the sun, the whispers of the wind across vast plains. He shared anecdotes about generations who had tilled this soil, built these fences, and battled the elements, instilling in him a profound respect for endurance and community. He didn't idealize it. He spoke of the hardships with the same calm frankness as he did the beauty, highlighting the constant negotiation with a world that demanded strength and self-reliance. Madison listened, truly listened, perhaps for the first time in her life, not to the cacophony of a bustling city or the curated narratives of her social circle, but to the quiet, steady wisdom of a man deeply connected to his environment. Her initial sense of being an alien in this desolate place slowly began to recede, replaced by a nascent curiosity. She hadn't realized how much she had judged this world from the superficial gloss of her urban existence, how narrowly she had defined success and value. Cole wasn't just fixing her car, he was subtly, gently recalibrating her entire perspective. He was showing her a kind of wealth that couldn't be quantified in bank accounts or luxury brands, a richness found in character, integrity, and a deep understanding of one's place in the world. She started to see Cole not merely as her rescuer, the cowboy who had diffused a dangerous situation, but as a kind of unexpected mentor. His calm demeanor, his unshakable conviction, his practical skills, and his profound respect for the land and its people offered a vision of strength and resilience she hadn't considered possible, let alone desirable, in her own life. It was a strength born not of aggression or accumulation, but of quiet confidence and unwavering principle. The incident, far from being a mere traumatic interlude, was becoming a turning point. Back in town, the incident with Madison and the two rednecks became the talk of the community, spreading like wildfire from the diner to the feed store, from the church potluck to the high school football game. It sparked animated discussions about respect, vulnerability, and the unwritten social contracts that governed their rural lives. Some defended the rednecks, citing long-standing grievances against city folk and their perceived arrogance, echoing the undercurrent of resentment at play. Others vehemently condemned their actions, emphasizing the deep-seated value of hospitality and the protection of visitors, regardless of their background. The local newspaper, a weekly handout filled with school news and cattle prices, even ran a small piece, delicately skirting the more unsavory details, but highlighting Cole Hart's decisive intervention and the need for neighborly conduct. The event served as a stark reminder of the fragile balance within their close-knit society, forcing everyone to reflect on their own roles and responsibilities. It became a crucible, forging a clearer understanding of the hidden strengths and moral compass that truly defined their rural community, proving that even in isolation, there was a powerful, collective spirit. The vast expanse of the Texas landscape, once a symbol of her isolation, slowly began to transform in Madison's mind. It wasn't merely vacant land. It was a living, breathing entity, shaped by the hands and traditions of people like Cole. Her initial prejudices about rural Texans, born from superficial media portrayals, and her own insulated upbringing, began to crumble, replaced by a dawning appreciation for the depth and complexity of their lives. She observed the quiet efficiency with which Cole handled his horse, the effortless way he read the subtle cues of the land, the innate understanding he possessed about surviving and thriving in this environment. It was a stark contrast to her world of smart algorithms and curated experiences, where success often hinged on abstract concepts rather than tangible skills. Cole, in his unassuming way, became an unexpected teacher. He didn't offer grand pronouncements or lectures. Instead, his lessons unfolded through his actions and simple, often profound words. As they waited for the tow truck, he spoke of droughts and floods, of tough seasons and unexpected bounties, of the deep-rooted respect for nature that was intrinsic to ranching life. He shared anecdotes about his family, generations etched into this very soil, their stories woven into the fabric of the community. He explained the symbiotic relationship between man and animal, the responsibility that came with caring for the land, the patience required to witness its slow, relentless cycles. He wasn't overtly preachy, yet every word carried the weight of lived experience, portraying a different kind of power than she was accustomed to. It was the power of endurance, of interconnectedness, of a quiet dignity born from self-reliance and an unwavering connection to one's roots. Madison listened intently, every fiber of her being absorbing these new perspectives. She had always measured success by financial metrics, by market trends, by the latest technological advancements. Cole, however, defined it through resilience, through community, through the simple act of living harmoniously with the earth. His hands, calloused and strong, spoke volumes about a life of labor, of facing challenges head-on, of an integrity that didn't need validation from external sources. Compared to the often superficial interactions of her city life, Cole's authenticity was refreshing, almost disarming. This forced encounter, so terrifying initially, became a crucible for Madison's dawning self-awareness. She realized her privileged life had insulated her from certain harsh realities, from the raw, elemental struggles that shaped so many lives. Her wealth had provided comfort, certainly, but it had also inadvertently created a buffer, preventing her from truly understanding the diverse tapestry of human experience. This incident, with its raw edges and unexpected kindness, forced her to confront her own vulnerabilities, not just physically, but emotionally and intellectually. She saw that her strength, while considerable in her own domain, was narrowly focused. Here, in this vast, untamed landscape, she was exposed, her carefully constructed defenses stripped away. But in that exposure, she also found a nascent strength, a resilience she hadn't known she possessed, a willingness to learn, to adapt, to truly see. The old cowboy and his horse had not just rescued her from a physical threat. They had, in a profound and quiet way, begun to rescue her from the limitations of her own perception. She understood that navigating this world, or any world, required more than just intelligence or money. It demanded a deeper understanding of humanity, a stronger connection to the land, and a profound respect for the inherent dignity of every struggle. The final turn of the wrench echoed in the quiet afternoon air, signifying completion. Cole straightened, wiping his hands on a worn rag, a faint oil smudge marking his cheek. Madison's car, surprisingly resilient under his expert ministrations, hummed to life with a satisfying purr, a sound that a few hours ago she hadn't been sure she would ever hear again. It was a mechanical symphony to her ears, a promise of her imminent departure from a place that had challenged her in ways she never imagined. She walked around the front, running a hand over the cool metal, a gesture of gratitude to the machine that would carry her away, and to the man who had made it possible. Their eyes met, and in that shared glance, an unspoken dialogue passed between them. No longer the terrified heiress and the stoic cowboy, they were simply two individuals who had navigated a moment of crisis together. Madison felt a profound shift within her, a shedding of the superficial layers that had defined her existence. "Cole," she began, her voice softer than she'd ever heard it. I don't know how to thank you. You didn't just fix my car, you showed me something important." She gestured vaguely at the vast landscape, then back towards the road, encompassing the entire ordeal. "I came here with so many assumptions, so much arrogance, I realize now. I thought I knew everything, but I didn't know anything about real strength or true kindness until today." Cole offered a small, knowing smile, the lines around his eyes crinkling. "Just doing what needed to be done, ma'am. Out here we look out for each other. It's how we survive." His words were simple, unadorned, yet they carried the weight of generations, a fundamental truth that resonated deep within Madison's core. She understood then that his strength wasn't just physical or born of skill, but of an inherent connection to his community and the land itself, a resilience forged in the quiet dignity of a life lived purposefully. He hadn't sought glory or reward, he had simply acted. "It's more than that, Cole," Madison insisted, her voice tinged with a new humility. "You taught me humility. You showed me that what truly matters isn't what you own, but who you are and how you treat others. My world, my city life, it's so different. I've been so insulated." She paused, searching for the right words. "I thought I was strong because I could navigate boardrooms and financial markets. But that's a different kind of strength, one that felt utterly useless out here. You have a strength that is genuine, and I admire that more than any fortune." They stood there for a few more moments, the sun beginning its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was comfortable, layered with understanding. Madison knew this encounter would forever be etched into her memory, a turning point that would reshape her perspective, making her question the very foundations of her identity. The heiress who arrived with a broken car and a broken sense of superiority was leaving with a repaired vehicle and a mended, more open heart. As she finally slid into the driver's seat, the leather feeling less decadent and more simply functional, she looked at Cole again. "Thank you for everything," she repeated, her gaze unwavering. He nodded, a silent farewell. Pulling away, she glanced in her rearview mirror, watching his solitary figure standing by the side of the road, a sentinel of integrity in the boundless Texas landscape. She understood, with absolute clarity, that true strength wasn't always found in wealth or status, but often in the quiet, unassuming grace of a cowboy beneath an endless sky. This journey, fraught with humiliation, had ironically led her to an invaluable treasure: self-knowledge.